Welcome, everyone, and thank you for coming to this Government Operations and Fiscal Policy Committee meeting. Today, we are joined by a colleague, Council Member Balcom. Thank you for joining us today. We are talking to our Office of Grants Management. This is a follow-up to our meeting we had on November 12th of 2024. After our meeting on November 12th, we did send a letter over to the Office of Grants Management and the Executive Branch on December 3rd, outlining a number of questions and follow-ups from that November meeting. I'll turn it over to Ms. Clemens Johnson to walk through the packet and then turn it over to Director Murphy. Thank you.
Good morning, Chair Stewart. For the packet, we just provided just a brief background of what was discussed at our November 12th meeting, and also highlighted the memo that the GO committee sent, and also the response received from the Chief Administrative Officer. I did provide a few grant updates regarding the office and the work that they have been doing, their efforts to really improve communication by hosting monthly forums, putting in place a weekly newsletter, and their transition to a new grant platform. So the office has been very busy and trying to be responsive to our organizations. So I do not have any further updates, but if there are any questions, please let me know and I can address them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Murphy, would you like to walk through the responses we've received that was sent over from Mr. Madalino, who unfortunately is not with us this morning?
Yes, of course. For the record, Rafael Murphy, Director, Office of Grants Management. So within the response, it starts out by giving a background of the community grants competition, and that's been presented in previous hearings, but I think it's worth noting just how enormous the number of applications were, how difficult the review process was due to the number of applications, how difficult it was to match reviewers, subject matter expert reviewers from county government to programs that were outside of their scope. And the difficulty that we had, an entire 10-month-long process from when we opened up for competitions to when we finally got the notification letters out. And then the ending competitiveness, a 98.18 out of 100 score was the average winning score, which I've never seen that in my 20-year career of grants, of just how competitive that was because of the volume, the range, and the quality of the projects that we had. And $5.3 million sounds like a lot of money, but that went really quickly with what we had and the quality of proposals. So that left a lot of traditional partners out of the mix, and that left a lot of new potential partners out of the mix as well. But that's how, statistically, and it was purely a data-driven approach in terms of how we came to awards, it worked. And so that leads into how we wanted to approach that. What the county executive did after seeing that a lot of the traditional partners were going to be left off. We found leftover money in FY24 and a little bit FY25 money to continue for another year awards for these legacy recipients, 102 organizations, about $4.7 million total to give them continuing funding. So they weren't cut off in like 2 months before the fiscal year ended. So that money is ongoing. Those programs are continuing to be implemented, going through. Now, in terms of what the CIO puts in there in terms of going forward, he intends to, or the county executive intends to continue the 3-year multi-year grants for the community grants recipients, pending council appropriations, of course, and pending performance. So if we find that any of these partners are not performing well, that the programs are not doing what they said they were going to do or having other challenges, then we will cut off funding for them, and that money will be recycled back into the general fund. But beyond that, the recompeting community grants, unless there's additional funds appropriated, those awards, that pot of money is going to be locked in for these multi-year awards until those expire in FY27. That'll be the last year that the multi-year will be. Within that year, we'll recompete those for FY28 awards going forward. What the letter outlines is the intent to put more concrete targets, goals of what this pot of money, like dice up the money basically into pots focused on specific areas, not to have what we did in FY24, where it was just a wide open competition for any type of service in any type of sector. And so that will give us a more targeted approach and build on what we've seen as successes, where we are able to fly through grants competitions in 2 to 3 months get awards out the door quickly and get partners using the funds and having impact on our communities when you have it targeted. And then we also have a much better match of subject matter experts who are actually reviewing these applications rather than kind of you get what you get when you're a reviewer or an applicant, which isn't the best way to go through these. The letter then goes into asks about what we could do to improve the process. And I feel I've been pretty consistent about we really need to set specific targets for our pots of money. If we want to do mental health, let's do mental health and set parameters around it to do it. If we want to target rural nonprofits or small nonprofits, let's set the parameters around that to make sure the money goes to those organizations or reaches those organizations. If we leave it wide open, again, I think a lot of the data that we've collected as part of the review process and doing somewhere between 80, 90 hours of feedback sessions with our applicants going through the reviews line by line, comment by comment, score by score, shows that there's just fundamental imbalances when you do these wide open competitions, and smaller nonprofits are left out. Certain sectors are left out. Certain types of needs are left out, just kind of systemically. That was one of the slides I presented in the last hearing. So again, just being more targeted with how we approach it, set clear boundaries around the pots of money that we put out there is just going to lead to better processes. And throughout this past year with appropriations or other department-like grant programs, we've been successful in continuing to do that. So that's pretty much, again, I just want to reinforce what I feel I've been saying for a while. And again, we provide the list of some of the different, really unique types of grant programs that we've helped departments put money out as a grant agreement as opposed to procurement contract. And that often gets kind of lost in the mix of the fundamental differences between a grant agreement and a procurement contract, where procurement contracts are reimbursable, which is a huge burden on our nonprofit partners. For a lot of our grant programs, we're giving people all the money up front, cash. So they're spending our cash as opposed to waiting to get reimbursement. And we still have accountability mechanisms. We still have the ability to audit at will to make sure that funds are being used appropriately. We still have the legal ability to claw back funds if we need to. But it's just a fundamentally different model of how we approach how that contractual agreement between the county and the nonprofit is. And it's a fundamentally better one. It's also easier to include indirect costs. So all of our grants have allowed up to 15% of indirect costs actually as a floor of 15% of indirect cost. So if they're able to demonstrate they have a higher indirect cost that's been approved by the federal government, we'll give them that. But that's a key lifeline to our nonprofits to get that unrestricted funds that they use for their core operations. So we've been doing that for 18 months. That's harder to do in procurement contracts. So there's just a number of benefits of having a grant versus a procurement contract that really helps our partners. In terms of the legacy awards, with the CE's intent going forward, again, we felt that a lot of these projects scored very high. It was very disappointing to have a feedback session with someone who scored a 97.5 average score, who was a traditional partner, seems to have been doing great work for the community, but average winning score is 98.18 and they lost out. And so there were a lot of partners who did score high and just were left out due to the highly competitive nature of the competition. So the CE's intent, while he has not released his FY26 budget yet, is to include funding to give all of these legacy renewals another year funding through FY26. That is going to be subject to performance. So if we find any of these folks have not been doing what they're supposed to, they haven't been a good steward of resources, or not having the impact that they said they would, then the funding will be cut off. But that is the intent going forward for legacy renewals into FY26. Past FY26, the letter outlines how we, again, doing a targeting of resources, setting parameters, and some examples are given, such as youth services, aging, disability, natural resources, different types of topics that we could align the grant program around to collect applications that really focused on those key areas. And what the key areas are going to be a year from now, it's hard to say, especially with a lot of the uncertainty at the federal level. We could see holes in our needs in our community open up that we're not used to. And so having that kind of flexible pool to kind of target at these key needs at that time, it's better to set those needs when we know what they are. So essentially there will be a two-track approach for the community grants. The folks who won the competition, they will continue on with their multi-year awards, subject to appropriation and subject to good performance. And then the legacy renewals will get 1 year of funding more, subject to performance and appropriation. And then for the cost sharing capital grants, those have all been resolved. Award letters have all been sent out. I think there's a handful of partners that we don't have grant agreements yet, but those have all been resolved. And so we've actually opened up the FY25 competition now. I did the information session for nonprofit applicants yesterday. It's online, it's recorded for their accessibility, getting questions for potential applicants. We've reached out to people who were unsuccessful last time around and encouraged them to reapply. And so that's ongoing. For FY26, what I anticipate doing is as soon as the legislative session ends, is to post what we've been doing is a multi-stage applications for a lot of our programs, is just simply posting an FY26 module in our platform for cost sharing capital grants. And because what we always know is we know who gets money from the state, but we don't know how much they want from us. And so that module will be very simple, just their contact information, proof that they won a state award, and what they're in the base amount of what they're going to want from us. And so that'll be, after the CE releases his budget, but before you vote on the final budget. So you'll have some clear data of there. And then based on that, once they prove eligibility, we can have a second stage where then we ask for more detailed documents and backup and plans and demonstration that they're going to use the funds well. And then if council decides that as part of your voting that you want to put more parameters or focus on these state matched funds for cost sharing capital grants, then that'll be a prerogative, and I will integrate that into the competition. So stage one will just be seeing what is the body of need or requests out there. And stage two will be, okay, how do we meet your priorities as you set them in the budget? So we did receive the letter that you sent about prioritizing cost sharing capital grants and that they should be for state matched. And that's going forward. That's what we see just based on the data that we have and the volume of applications we get and the need that we see. There's that really should be prioritized. If the state does work for us, we should help them with these projects. And I believe that covers the letter.
I think it does. Thank you very much, Mr. Murphy. I was informed there must have been a miscommunication effort that I thought Mr. Madalino had been invited, but it seems like there was miscommunication and he had not received the invitation to be here today. So he did not know we requested him. So we'll follow up on how that miscommunication happened. I will say the letter did come from the CAO's office, and I appreciate all your efforts. Director Murphy, you have, as you said in your comments, you have been saying these things for a while to this committee. And I think one of the frustrations we have is that we have identified the places where we need to make improvements and changes. In our letter of December 3rd to you and the executive's office, we asked for a strategic plan for the next community awards process because of the timing of when that will be put in place. And again, the response that we're receiving is we're going to get to that. The same thing with the legacy grants. We're going to get to that. I think the concern that I'm expressing as chair of this committee, as well as channeling the concern I'm hearing at every single community meeting I go to. I was just on a meeting this morning with the Commission on Aging, and they mentioned this. I cannot go to a community meeting without some nonprofit or group in our community asking us, what are we doing with our community grants? I don't understand. There's a lot of instability right now in the county because of what's happening in the White House, but that is compounded by the fact that we still don't have clarity on how we're going to move forward with our community grants for our nonprofits and members of our community. And the process for the legacy grants just does not seem clear to people whatsoever. So we have requested and have not received a strategic plan. And it just seems to me that this administration has no plans of actually addressing this problem. This administration has less than 2 years in place. And given the timing of community grants and other things, we need a plan yesterday for these things. And I know you've been saying to us, this is how you see we can put things in place and move forward. And I guess, and maybe I'm putting you in an unfair position here, but I'm trying to figure out how do we move forward? to address the situation. It is clear from your expertise and what you've seen from the expertise of our nonprofit partners in the community that there are ideas on how we can move this forward. And I guess my question is what do we do? Because we're not getting that strategic plan. We're not getting that direction right now. And what our nonprofits and our community members need right now is answers and stability and understanding of, in this great time of uncertainty, how we can plan for the future. So I don't know if you have anything else to add to that. And I understand all of the hard work that you've been doing. I'll open it up to my colleagues. Councilmember Katz.
Thank you. They certainly I come on my microphone here. It's just Mr. Goodyear's on. First of all, thank you for all you do. You said that somebody who can get a 97% and still not get a legacy grant. What happened? First off, that's unbelievable. And second, what happens to the people who don't reach the survey? 97% is an A. So there are several people as we speak. Well, we're saying, man, it's just not good enough. You need another 1 point, whatever it is. What happens to the people who are serving?
Well, for that, the organization I mentioned, they received a legacy grant. So they didn't receive a community grant, but they received a legacy. So because they did score very high, and that's where the CE did put in FY24 resources, and that's where he anticipates putting in FY26 resources to keep that program going, because they had been serving the community well. They did get a high score. It wasn't high enough to win a community grant, but they got the legacy award.
So there is a safety, or is there, I should ask rather than say, is there a safety valve that groups that are actually doing our work? I mean, these are the great processes because we don't know our work better than women do our work in some cases. Is there a safety valve on that?
Legacy renewals was the safety valve.
Okay. And when you tell someone, and we were talking about it in the discussion, that things are and now that you're going to cut off funding, how do you tell them how they can correct that, and then how much time do you give them before their funding is cut off?
I mean, that was last year. That was the conversation throughout the last fiscal year. We anticipated, or I anticipated, that we could move through the process much quicker than we could. And we had the bridge funding, and we thought, oh no, we need more time. We need more time. So we kept on doing it. So that was a lot of stress on our nonprofit partners with that instability. And I fully acknowledge that. And that is also very much contributed to the CE giving a full year of funding for these organizations. So with the notification that these organizations, or the CE intends to, subject to appropriations, extend this another year, that'll give them a lot of stability. But for other grant programs, when funding runs out, or if we lose an award, we really do need to let our partners know as soon as we are certain that this funding is going to be cut off.
And what happens to those organizations? If we cut the funding off, do we follow what happens to those organizations who are serving the residents of Montgomery County? Do we know how they can stay in business, how they're able to function?
I think it goes organization to organization. Larger organizations will probably just cut off that component, that program, that service, and just go on with other funded components that they have within the organization. But some smaller organization, if they lose that funding from us, then that's pretty much it. Yeah.
That's there's a lot of concerns, but one of my greatest concerns is that we are actually by someone getting 97% or whatever that number is, an extremely high number. I'm still saying that, but that's just not good enough. That concerns me, what happens to those organizations, because we are their lifeblood. And I think we need to make certain to the president's and chair's point. I think we need to have really a blueprint waiting for yesterday to figure out what we're doing and how we're keeping people in business. If it's not our money, why isn't it? And how are we able to keep them functioning? Because this is a real concern. And with that, I'll turn it back to you, Madam President.
Thank you. Councilmember Peterson.
Thank you to colleagues. Thanks. First of all, I want to just echo the comments that were made, particularly by the chair and president. There's a lot of frustration, and understandably so. I mean, we're basically 6 years into this. I mean, there was a previous chair who was here with Councilmember Katz and me for these initial conversations. And frankly, it predates your role in this. And by all accounts, the two universal truths of this whole process is one, ongoing frustration and anxiety among our nonprofit partners, and two, that people really do appreciate that you're trying your best and that you're working really hard. And within the confines of the world in which you have been given, which is to execute what has been asked of you, you are doing what you can. And so the frustration that you're hearing from colleagues here, the frustration that you'll hear from me, is not directed at you and your ability to do the job that you've been asked to do. And frankly, all the work that you have done up to this point. It's the fact that, I think the quote that I've got down is, this administration has no plan. And it's really not up to you to make the policy decisions on what that plan would entail. But we are 6 years into this, and it's just an ongoing dynamic of a black hole for nonprofit partners who have no idea how decisions are going to be made, when decisions are going to be made, how they should plan accordingly. And the legacy grants is a good example of this. Last year there were unrealistic expectations set. We don't need to relitigate those. I was very upfront about my concern and my skepticism of whether or not the ambitious goals could come anywhere close to reality. Ultimately, we gave extra runway. That extra runway, which there was resistance to even giving that extra runway, missed the extended deadline that we had. And ultimately, this resulted in legacy grants. Now we're doing legacy grants again. And my concern is we're going to do exactly that till next year. Yep. And all you've done, and all the CEO's memo suggests, is that we've kicked the can down the road for what will be the 7th consecutive year for a process that has not permanently changed. And how are partners supposed to plan? On the one hand, Councilmember Katz discussing concern about the services that are being provided and what happens to those services that are being provided at a time when we need these services more than ever. That is a real question and a real concern. Beyond that, though, how are nonprofits supposed to plan if they don't know what they can apply for, if they don't know when the funding is going to come? We've had FY24 money that doesn't get allocated until 2 years later. I mean, it's craziness. And it's just completely unacceptable for us to take 6 years or 7 years to come up with a plan for how we're going to approach this. At a certain point, we got to decide either we're moving in a certain direction or we're not. Either we're going to make a tough choice or we're not. Either we're going to see if something works or we won't. Because this just perpetual dynamic of kicking the can down the road, trying to punt things if we don't like the outcome. And what it feels like is that we head in a direction and either we can't execute what we say we're going to execute, or there are people within the executive branch who don't like the outcome. And so they kick the can down the road because they don't like the outcome. That's not acceptable. That's not fair. That's not reasonable to our nonprofit partners. It's not fair even for the legacy partners who don't really know what this legacy is going to mean. It's really not fair for those who didn't get in the queue. Because if this was a process that was supposed to be more metrics focused and more equitable and more reasonable and fair and more transparent, it's the opposite of that. It's worse, not better in that sense. Because arbitrarily, at some point, when some deadline is missed, somebody on the second floor, the county executive, the chief administrative officer, not you, because you're not, essentially making these ultimate calls, which I understand and I appreciate. Somebody is making a decision how to move forward. And you don't know what's happening. You don't know who's making that decision. Ultimately, you don't know what that decision is based on. And that is just completely unacceptable. We have to decide. We have to have a plan. Executive needs to send us over a plan. The council needs to review that plan. And then we all transparently need to communicate what that plan is with the stakeholders who are impacted here. We are sitting here and shouting from the mountaintops about all of our frustration of how the federal government is treating nonprofit service providers and other service providers. And we are not doing our part to help in a time when there is so much uncertainty, so much chaos, so much challenge. We have to control the part of this that we actually can control, which is how we do our partnerships, how we communicate our processes. We are falling woefully short. Again, it is not your fault. You are only able to communicate the information that you have. You are only able to execute the plan and the policy decisions that you've been given. But we have to be so much better than this, and it is not anywhere near the level that it should be. We're not communicating adequately enough, and we haven't planned properly enough. And that is just not acceptable. On the last piece, I will note on the cost sharing questions, I do agree that we are going to have significant needs, and we sent a separate letter on that as well. To step up to the plate in the way that you had described, which I appreciate the way that you described this, that our state delegation is stepping up in significant ways to support our partners in the community to provide significant needs and address significant needs in our community. And I do think that we need to be prepared to meet that and to step up and partner with them. We're not going to solve the challenges in our community, particularly in this incredibly chaotic moment, unless we lean into partnership. That means leaning into our state partnerships with our state delegation. That means really leaning in even more than we always have to our nonprofit partnerships. I talk a lot about how our secret sauce in Montgomery County is the partnerships the county government has with our nonprofit partners. The layers of mesh that we cannot address and serve the most vulnerable in our community with county government alone. And that is going to be more true now than ever before. And we're going to have to really batten down the hatches. We're going to have to really double and triple down on those partnerships that we needed during the pandemic. We're going to need them just as much, if not more, moving forward, because the challenges that we had during the pandemic aren't going away for vulnerable populations and for the challenges facing our nonprofit service providers. And we have new challenges, significant new challenges that are coming on board. So we need to communicate better. We need a much better plan, and we need to get out of this perpetual cycle where it feels like Groundhog Day. It really does feel like deja vu all over again. I feel like the only thing that has changed is that we're now on this Davidson hero room on the second floor instead of on the seventh floor, where we've had multiple conversations, or the third floor where we've had multiple conversations. But it feels like every year this committee has the exact same conversation with the exact same responses without a clear plan for moving forward. And it has got to get better, because our nonprofit partners deserve way more than what we're providing right now, and a lot better communication than what they've gotten up to this point. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for allowing me to sit in.
So I share the same concerns, and I'll focus just a few things. I just want to confirm, so the legacy grants for 2026 are currently we will see those in the proposed CE budget when we get it in a couple weeks.
That is my understanding. I haven't seen the final book yet, but yeah, that is my understanding.
Okay. And is your intention then to get that money out? So can our legacy receivers or grantees expect that money right away in FY26?
Sure. So what we would do, and we'll be doing this for we have many multi-year grant awards based on all the different grant programs we've run. So we'll open up like a special module within our grant platform. They'll essentially submit to us updated information for this going into FY26. Updating contact information. The grant agreements have a number of attachments to it that outline their proposal, which is, they're not competing for it, but they still have to give us a proposal because their proposal becomes a scope of work. So we'll give them the opportunity to upload their scope of work, their timeline, their budget, to meet the level that they've been given. We review those. The department grant monitors will review those. If they're okay, then we integrate all that into a grant agreement, and then we run it through the grant agreement approval process, AP2-4. And so then once that's fully signed and executed, we issue a DPO, direct purchase order. But we should be able to do that all before fiscal year 26 starts. So when fiscal year 26 starts on June 1, 2025, that grant agreement, that DPO is in place, and they'll have the money. Depending on the size of the grant, they'll either get if it's a small grant, our kind of threshold is 25,000 below, they just get all the money up front. If it's a larger grant, we'll give them maybe 30-40% up front. They spend, again, our cash. They submit a report showing that they've been doing good work. Then it releases another tranche of funding. They usually get 90% of their funding, before then. So yeah, that if it is, so that's the plan.
And then the second year, the second year for all the awardees, same process. So they'll get their money July 2026. Anyone that has a community grant, a legacy grant, should be able to start the process to get their funding.
Correct.
Okay. And then the process of actually getting the check should be relatively quick.
Sure. Once the fiscal, I'd have to look at the specifics of the, apologies. I have to look at the specifics of the grant agreement, but once we get if we have to wait till the fiscal year starts to actually cut them a check, or preferably an ACH budget transfer. But we're almost, as soon as the grant term starts, they should be able to get, if not that upfront payment, 100% or the first chunk of funding.
Great, thanks. I share the same concern about, what happens in FY27, right? And without having, and time, as everybody knows, goes by very quickly when you're trying to set up a program and stand up a program. So the issue of at what point do these legacy grants move from you, Office of Grants Management, to the various departments that have to assess whether the county is going to continue funding services? And so we need to have a full understanding of what kind of review process Office of Grants Management undertakes, because as Councilmember Katz said, we have 102 nonprofits out there doing the work of the government with our residents that will no longer be able to do that work. We need to have a full assessment of how critical each of those services are, because if the money goes away and the organization goes away, then what is the gap of service? And so we need to be working on that now. The reason I'm here today is I hear it from my constituents out in the community as to what's going to happen to these services. The other reason I'm here is this is a major process issue, and I just simply can't understand why we can't get it right. And I echo my colleagues. I appreciate the work that you're doing, and
in particular, the communication that you provide. You've been very present whenever we have a question. So I really appreciate that. So I think that the question that has to be answered by the executive branch is how are they going to absorb the cost of services that aren't being funded through the grant process? So do we need to move into all the various HHS to say, okay, senior services, youth services, all these grants are going to have to be either absorbed, or we need to all accept that this service is no longer taking place in our community. So we need an answer to how that process is going to happen. Because with a lack of process, you're going to have 102 nonprofits knocking on everyone's door and 11 council members screaming about these services. So that has to happen. And I know that we're talking about 2026 right now, but 2027 planning, we need to be looking at that now. So that's it for the legacy grants. I do also want to say that from the overall plan perspective, there are a lot of questions that I have that can't be answered today, but should be answered in the process of developing an overall strategy, long-term strategy for how we manage grants. One is the time frame. Is 3 years too long? We're in such uncertain time right now, and I hope that we'll level off from the crisis that we're in right now. But I'm not here to make us even a suggestion about is 3 years too long. We have to strategically look at that might be too long. Maybe it should be 2 years. I can't answer that today because we don't have a process for answering that question. The other is subject matter expert reviews. Major problem with having those reviews, those individuals in place. Is that the right strategy? We don't know the answer to that. And what is the strategy if it is a 3-year grant? How are we going to ensure that those people are in place? That is a strategic question. It's a logistical question. And I think we cannot wait until we're ready to sit those panels. And then the other, I agree with the concept of having issue-based grants as opposed to come one, come all. But which issues, which buckets, and how much money is going to go to each of those buckets? If we've got $5.3 million, how is that money spread out? We cannot wait to start having those discussions. And so I just want to really echo that we need a plan in place so this never happens again. And I know that you appreciate that and understand that. I just want to take one last minute about the the CIP matching grants. And I understand the disconnect between the state budget and the county budget. And so there is a lag in regards to that budget. But can you just walk me briefly through the process? The state makes it we just this Monday are already hearing about the 2026 grants. Tell me just briefly the process. We get confirmation from the state mid-April as to what they're going to fund. What's the process then?
So about 24 to 48 hours after the state makes their final decision, Director Wenger from Office of Government Relations, she passes me a spreadsheet showing all of the capital awards that were given in the state budget. And so we go through that to see who might be asking us for money. What did they say in their brown sheets, which is the application they submit in the fall, which may or may not be accurate. And so it's been kind of a guessing game there. So when we get that confirmation, we get that spreadsheet, we'll go through that, but I'll also open up a module in our grants application platform. It'll be in our newsletter. It'll be in our forecast. to broadcast out that to our nonprofit partners who have a state award pending that, hey, this does come through, as soon as you know you got it, go here, put, very briefly and easily put your hat in the ring.
So the time frame of when you know those applications, then then the process, how do you determine who gets grants? Just
Well, we collect that. What we do is we collect applications. They have to demonstrate, what they're going to do with the funds, what is the impact of the project. Yeah, it's a pretty standard grants application. What cost sharing, where's their other money coming from? Do they have all the money they need to actually get the project started, or are they going to be waiting for 2 to 3 years for them to get all the money they need before the project started? So that's been the key problem point.
And then where are we in the calendar? When you make your final determination, where are we in the calendar?
So we would gather all of the applications. I'm only expecting probably 15 to 20, because if we're only looking at state matched applications, previously, again, same problem as community grants, we had unmatched cost sharing capital grants, come one, come all, other money for any capital idea you have. Had a small amount of grants applications that jam things up. If we're only looking at state matches and we're only collecting state matches and they have to prove they have a state match, we're looking at 15 to 20 applications. So a team of 3 people can go through those fairly quickly. We've had IGR, intergovernmental relations, OMB reviewers, people with capital experience going through that state experience.
So the time frame.
So that's I would say a month after the application closes, we can have results.
And so where are we in the calendar?
Right now, we're waiting for the state to come to resolution. In terms of the FY25 funds, because we're behind the FY25 funds, we just opened up the application late last week. So we've got about 3.5 weeks left before that closes. And so about a month after it closes, we're going to have results for FY25.
Okay, so what's going to happen in FY26? So we're not in the same situation.
We open it up as soon as the state comes to their final resolution. And then so we collect the applications of people who know they got their awards. We go through those applications very quickly. We might even come to results before you complete your budget and have recommendations to even put in your budget.
Okay, I think that it's, we got 24 out the door, right?
Yeah.
Okay, so, and we're already starting to look at 2026. And so we just have to, the process has to be very clear.
Yeah.
And I don't, this is a situation where I really don't understand why the process has taken so long. But water under the bridge, I would assume that 2026 will not have the same problem.
No, because again, we'll be limiting it to do not apply unless you have a state match. Okay. And that limits the number of awards. It creates this very small boundary. Again, getting back to the concept of targeting, it's targeting the eligibility. And so we won't have, 80 plus applications like we did in FY24, which was really difficult to find enough reviewers to go through. So that just log jammed everything. Same thing it did to community grants or these other smaller grants programs. So by targeting it, setting clear parameters around it, focusing our money, which is scarce and limited on the state matches, we can have a much more manageable competition.
Okay, thank you. We have to hear from the county executive branch, from the county executive, that there is a plan in place that this will be corrected and going forward what we're going to do. Because right now I have absolutely no faith that the next time we do this, we're going to get a different result. So I think we need to hear directly from him. Thank you.
Councilmember Friedson wanted to speak again.
Thank you. Well, first of all, the reference was made of water under the bridge. I mean, I will say it might be water under the bridge, but it's simply a bridge to nowhere. I mean, that's the problem. That has been the problem for 6 years, going on 7 years. And I don't think there's any confidence up here. I don't think there's any confidence among the nonprofit community, more importantly, that we're heading to a conclusion anytime soon, forever. And that is fundamentally the issue that we have. It is concerning that we're going to have a process that ends in 3.5 weeks. Where are we on the calendar? That brings us to the end of March, right? just given where we likely are. There'll be time that it takes to then review. If your timeline for moving forward is similar now, it's about a month. Is that accurate? A month after the applications are received to review? Is that what we expect?
To get results out the door. So after the review closes, So after the review closes, we analyze the data. We develop recommendations for the second floor because the CAO has to sign off on all grants awards. And so we develop recommendations. If he supports them, is okay with them, then he signs it, and then we move into the grant agreement stage. And so as soon as he signs it, we send notification letters out. We step the next steps of developing the grant agreements and getting that through. So 1 month after is review process plus all the internal approvals of the awards.
Okay, so 1 month after, just to be clear, that's 1 month after end of March. That takes us to end of April. So let's just, give a little bit of leeway here and say beginning of May, right? Which is, weeks before we finish the budget. It's after really we've done much of the committee work with the budget when the final decisions are being made. So it's really too late in the budget process unless we do something at the very, very end, which, would be difficult. Then you're going to initiate a new process. I just want to understand. So at that point, May 1st, based on your timeline, on or before May 1st, a cost sharing grant applicant is going to receive notification that they either received or didn't receive funding, and how much.
For FY25 funds.
For FY25, of course, because, we have to, we're in the rearview mirror here. Okay. So then when that happens, at what point, once they receive that information, will they then start applying for FY26 funds, and will there be a protocol to deal with how that works? At that point, we would know what the state has done for FY26. We already know what the state has done for FY25. Presumably, because people are applying for funds from years before, and this is kind of how this process works, because things have dragged on for so long. How is that going to work? Just based on what you just shared with Councilmember Balcom.
That's why we would do this multi-stage application. We're starting to do it across all our grants programs. We have a very simple, easy first stage, which is not a lot of administrative work. And we just kind of collect basic information. So for that person, if they don't, as soon as they hear that they didn't get an award, but let's just assume the person didn't get an award. If they want it, they don't need to apply again. They would quickly put their hat in the ring for the FY26 pool of money. So they would not overlap. You would, before we would open up their opportunity for FY26, they would learn the results for FY25.
Okay. All right, and it would also include additional folks who receive that may not have applied because they didn't receive state funding before, or they didn't then, but circumstances have dramatically changed in recent months, et cetera. They would be part of that application pool as well.
Correct.
Okay, and two questions. Who was involved? You mentioned in passing some people who might be involved. Who might be involved in analyzing the cost sharing grants?
And we'll recruit reviewers from within county government who, in the past, Office of Intergovernmental Relations have participated. Their staff have backgrounds in the state bond bill process and looking at capital awards there. We've had OMB analysts with CIP experience contributing. We'd like to get the DGS involved since they'll be the ones actually overseeing these awards and monitoring them as well. So for Office of Grants Management, we will not be administering the awards. We facilitate the grants competition and awarding process, but then we hand off these awards to departments to oversee, and DGS oversees all of these cost sharing capital grants awards, and we always have.
When will it be decided, and who will decide who is on this review panel?
We typically recruit during the application period. So I'll be recruiting from, sending out notices to directors of these departments, asking them for staff to participate as reviewers. Again, I think based on the volume of applications we expect to receive, a team of 3 people, we always want to have an odd number to go through these, can go through that. It's usually about half an hour or so per application. So it's a manageable volume.
Who's on the FY25 review team?
But it hasn't been set yet.
When is it going to be set? The applications are due in 3.5 weeks.
fairly soon, but we always train them, usually midway between that. We recruit them, then we do a training with them so that as soon as the application period closes, we do our own administrative review, which is basically making sure the applications are complete. The folks are actually legally eligible. They actually have a state match within 24 to 48 hours. We pass those applications off to the reviewers for them to get started. Depending on the volume of applications, it's 1, 2, maybe 3 weeks. But for this volume, I mean, I would think about 1 to 2 weeks they could go through these.
As part of the follow-up from this committee session, I request that within 2 weeks that we have the specific people who will be involved in this review process. And I would presume and would like confirmation of whether or not that same panel would be on the next review process. I can't imagine why it wouldn't be, since it's going to happen within weeks, is what you have just told us. And if they're good enough for the first review, I can't imagine why they wouldn't participate in the second. But if you could confirm whether that would be the same review process, it doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense to reinvent the wheel or to wait until the applications go out to decide on new people or to spend the time to retrain. So let's get it right the first time. Let's confirm with us if there's feedback from the council ahead of time. I think there should be enough time, week and a half, 2 weeks for the council to weigh in. If we think that there aren't the right perspectives among that 3-person panel, we should have an opportunity to do that.
And just like one detail is because we have the arts category and then the non-arts, just to split it up and make it go quicker. Ideally, the same 3 people will look at, just one category and close that out. That's a grants best practice. So to make it move faster, we could have 2 teams of 3 people.
Okay, we'll share both of those teams of 3 people. Okay, so I understand on cost sharing grants. The last question that I would have, are we proactively reaching out to everybody who's received a cost sharing grant? I mean, it's such a small pool of people. Are we communicating with them to tell them what the process is? Now, I understand the universe of nonprofits in Montgomery County is massive. We utilize nonprofit partners like Nonprofit Montgomery, which we really appreciate, who are here today, among others, some of the large overarching organizations that are umbrella organizations of many nonprofits to lean in to reach out. Hopefully that will continue. You can't possibly reach everybody. Same is not true if you're talking about nonprofit organizations that have received state funding over the last several years, 2, 3, 4, 5 years, whatever window you want to do. Are we proactively reaching out to them?
No, I have not done that. We have usually relied on the passive. Usually they're kicking down our doors about getting money from us. But yeah, that is a fairly limited list. It's the tricky part about that list is it's not always clear who wants money from us and who doesn't. Because sometimes they put in the brown sheets that they are going to, which is their state application, that they are going to be seeking money or they have money from Montgomery County government. Other times they say, well, we're good. We've got all the money that we need if we get the state award.
It seems to me if they get the information and they don't need it, they will ignore it, or they will say, thank you, this is really helpful and we're really glad you're doing this, but we don't need it, so we're not going to go through the trouble of applying. It seems like a left here, and I would also strongly suggest that the same correspondence be copied or be sent to the members of the delegation so that they're aware, since these are the folks who are actually doing the legwork to get the state funds to begin with. And so if we can coordinate with them, that would be helpful. I think all members of the state delegation would be helpful. Obviously, Senator Zucker is, chair of the capital budget committee. He's very, active in these, but each delegation has its own effort. And so making sure that they're all included in that, I would urge you to do that. And if you could follow up as another follow-up for this committee to tell us exactly what you're sharing, when you're sharing it, and with whom you're sharing it, related to both FY25 and FY26. I think there's still time with 3.5 weeks left to reach out to everybody who's received state funding within a finite period. I'll yield to you of what an appropriate timeline is. Is it the last 3 years? Is it the last 5 years? Is it the last 3 years? I yield to you, but I want you to share with us how you decided on that. Switching gears back to the grants themselves, These legacy grants, the discussion has been about the services that these organizations are providing. The overarching question is, at what point are they moved to the base budget? There was a process before where there was a base budget question. And the departments got to decide whether they liked something or didn't like something based on information that none of us have any idea how those decisions were made, quite honestly. And I have been critical of that being part of the process. I think it was not the appropriate decision to make. I don't think departments should be arbitrarily deciding if they like certain programs or don't. But that ultimately was what was decided. And then everything that wasn't picked was left as part of the legacy grant, essentially, in the community grants. Is there a process for reviewing whether or not these legacy grants should move into the base budget? It would seem like a much more appropriate thing to do if the CAO has made the determination, or the county executive and the CAO have made the determination that these legacy grants are so important, these services are so critical to the community, that they are replacing or supplementing core government services. Shouldn't they be in the base budget?
The tricky thing with a lot of these programs is there's a lot of programs and services that important, valuable to the community, no question, but they don't really fit with, they do things that are really more aligned with other agencies outside of Montgomery County government. So there's a lot of academic preparation programs. County government doesn't necessarily do that. There's a lot of workforce development programs. The Workforce Montgomery does that on behalf of the county. So there's a lot of things that if you look at the list and what the type of service being provided, there's really not a clear home where you would say, well, this is something that HHS does, or this is something that recreation does. And so that's a tricky part about a lot of these awards is, well, where would you put them? And so you can, and that was one thing in the letter, they talked about clustering, about having competitions just for workforce, having competitions just for these academic prep programs, which again, are not really services that we really have a natural home, or where there's a logical place to put it in the base budget. So
Well, I would suggest that there be an analysis of all of the legacy grants and the buckets that you describe, and either identify whether that bucket falls into a county government department or it doesn't, and whether there is an outside partner that does that work. I think that analysis will help us make a decision for the actual plan that we've been talking about that we haven't seen, to decide whether or not it would make sense to create new grant programs within these categories and within these buckets. I also think there should be a review to decide if there are grants, legacy grants, that fall into departmental categories, and I believe that there likely are, that just were not picked, were not decided for reasons that none of us had any idea, that were made in a black room, a black hole that somebody decided somewhere. Either they liked it or they didn't like it. Either they decided to include it or they didn't decide to include it. And then we have to have a decision and a discussion about that. Should these be moved into the base budget? And if they are moved into the base budget, how? Because if I'm making a decision for legacy grants, we should make a decision on whether or not some of these legacy grants should just be included in the base budget. And that is a decision that we should make in this budget cycle. And you can provide us the analysis to make those decisions prior to the submission of the budget. And I think that is a topic of conversation that this committee can have, and then ultimately can send it over to the committee of jurisdiction to review the number of organizations and grants that fall within their category. Make a decision. Should this be a base budget? It would be revenue neutral for this budget year, but it would have an impact potentially for future budget years. But I think it's an important conversation, and one that the council has never been privy to, despite my objections previously that it seems inappropriate for departments on their own to be able to make these judgment calls in the absence of council and in the absence of any fair review process, panel, et cetera. It was an example of how this process, as well intended as it was, has had some of the opposite intended effects where it's been less transparent, it's been less accountable, it's been, it arguably has had more, parochial influence potentially on some of the decisions that have been made, or at least a lack of clarity that there have been decisions that weren't parochial. So I think that it is going to be important. You mentioned earlier before on you sending your recommendations based on the panel's analysis, based on the tremendous work that you and they will do and have done to the CAO, who ultimately has to decide whether or not he agrees. What happens if he doesn't agree? How does that process work? And has there been an example in the past where that has occurred, where you have submitted from a panel the results of a process and the chief administrative officer has not agreed with the decision? And what happened?
Don't believe that's ever happened.
Okay.
No.
You don't believe it's ever? I mean, it seems like you know. I mean, there haven't been that many of these, and if the CAO disagreed, he's essentially overruling you and overruling your committee. I would imagine that if your boss overruled you on one of the core functions of your job, and a committee that you had assembled and the work that they had done, that you would remember that.
Community grants was challenging, but there was no fundamental shift to the methodology.
Okay. Was there a slight change to the outcome? I mean, I'm not sure what a fundamental shift to the methodology would mean. I do know, but a slight change, any change to the outcomes. Were there any grants that have been changed based on the review?
Sure. I'm sorry. Grants have changed across all the different grant programs that we've done. No, questions have been raised, but it's never been challenged who won grants or that the methodology shifted.
Okay, it was only that the legacy decision was made based on the chief administrative officer was not comfortable with the outcome of the methodology, and so ultimately the decision for legacy grants was decided.
No, that discussion was with the county executive.
With the county executive. Okay, so the county executive ultimately decided to move forward with the legacy grants based on, so it was, don't change the methodology, change the process.
The community grants winners all is the same process, the same data. Anyone can take the data set I had. If you run the same methodology, you'll come to the same results. And that's across all grant programs. So none of that has ever been changed.
Okay.
The amount of funds available because of legacy renewals and being able to fund that did change it. But the fundamental methodology and the scoring, the ranking, that didn't change at all. Not one data point.
Okay. All right. I'll yield back.
Sorry. Thank you, Councilmember Friesen. I think having that analysis of the legacy grants will help us during this budget process. I wanted to add and just say thank you to your office. I think your newsletter is excellent. I do receive it. And I would say, especially for folks getting the cost sharing, even just forwarding that information so that then they sign up for the newsletter from the Office of Grants and Management, I think would be helpful to those nonprofits as we're ever trying to increase the communication and information that's sharing on that. And in addition to the finding out who is going to be doing the reviewing for the cost sharing, when you have solidified the timeline, if that could also be shared with the committee. As you know, in your office has always been incredibly responsive. We get a lot of inquiries, and so if there is information that we can just be passing on, like here is the timeline that you shared with us, that just makes it easier, one, for our nonprofits, so we're not sending them yet to another person to ask the information, and hopefully that takes some of the burden off of your office as well. So anything that you can share with this committee that we can then share out to the full council would be very beneficial. Before we wrap today, I think that we have a couple of things to move forward with. And we'll continue this conversation. We'll continue it with our nonprofit partners to get us to a place where we have a strategic plan moving forward. And figure out what we're doing in this ever-changing landscape. I do just want to spend a few moments, Mr. Murphy, if you had anything to update us on or want to come back. When we were here in November, we had talked about the Cornerstone group had provided some additional initial information to you after the election. If there was anything else that you wanted to update us on, given the federal landscape and what your office is seeing.
The Office of the County Attorney is performing a risk assessment regarding county grants and our federal exposure. OGM is assisting them with that effort, and I've been asked by the county attorney to refer all questions on that effort to him.
All right, we will ask the county attorney then. I'm not seeing any other questions or anything. Director Murphy, as always, thank you very much for coming. Thank you to our partners at Nonprofit Montgomery for their assistance, and Ms. Clemens Johnson, thank you for your work on the packet and putting together this session. With that, this